The notebook thing started my first week. I'd pulled a 6-month exchange attachment at the Velmarathi Cooperative Research Station on the lower shelf of Oreth 4, a joint xenobiology posting, one of 12 humans in a facility of around 300. The Velmarathi are ammonia breathers, translucent membrane bodies about the size of a beach ball, trailing filament clusters they use for fine manipulation. They float at roughly chest height. They're not unfriendly. They're curious in the way a senior researcher is curious about a new grad student. Benevolent, slightly condescending, permanently ready to be underwhelmed. The station ran on neural sync crystal arrays. Every Velmarathi researcher wore a filament cradle at the base of their trailing clusters, and when they observed something, a water chemistry reading, a specimen behavior, a measurement, they synchronized it directly to the array. No delay, no intermediary, no transcription error. The crystal held everything: timestamps, sensory data, cross-references, the whole record. It was elegant. I couldn't use it. Human neural architecture doesn't interface with Velmarathi crystal matrices. We'd known this before I boarded the transit. So I brought notebooks. 12 of them. Standard issue field journals, hard covers, graph paper. I wrote with a pressure pen, because I'd learned early that gel ink behaves strangely in variable atmospheric stations. I wrote observations in the evening at one of the canteen tables by the west viewport, the big one that looked out over the shelf's bioluminescent colonies, which were the whole point of the research program. Date, time, depth reading, behavior note, sketch if it warranted one. The first researcher to notice was Dr. Velsori, the station's senior comparative ecologist. She drifted over one evening while I was finishing up a notation on colony spawn timing, and she hovered there for a moment, filaments extended, studying the notebook the way you'd study a hand tool you'd never seen before. "You are writing," she said. The translation caller handles Velmarathi acoustic signaling reasonably well, though their register of polite surprise and their register of mild concern share about 80% of the same tonal pattern. "I am," I said, "with an implement." "Yes." She extended a filament and touched the edge of the page, very gently. "The information you record, it is not synchronized." "No, I write it down." She withdrew the filament and made a small gesture I'd come to read as the Velmarathi equivalent of a bemused headshake. "Very interesting," she said, in the tone someone uses when they mean the opposite. She mentioned it to colleagues. I know because the next evening there were 3 of them at the neighboring table, watching without quite watching, the way researchers observe a specimen they haven't classified yet. Then one of the junior associates, a young membrane named Velkarath who'd been assigned to cross-species coordination and spoke the best human standard of anyone at the station, came and sat across from me, or floated across, hovering just above the bench, and asked, quite directly, whether I found the neural sync interface uncomfortable, or whether there was a medical reason for the notebooks. "Neither," I said. "It's just how I was trained." "Trained," he repeated. "As in, your institution required it?" "As in, my field supervisor did it, and her field supervisor did it, and at some point, it became the thing you did." He considered that a cultural artifact. Sure. He photographed the open notebook with his membrane-mounted imaging system. I didn't object. He asked if he could send the image to his family cluster, because they'd asked about human customs on the station. I said that was fine. After that it became a running thing. Gentle, not cruel. The Velmarathi don't really do cruelty. They do precision, but consistent. During the weekly data review, when every researcher synchronized their week's records to the main array in a collective upload that took approximately 4 seconds and covered everything, I would produce my notebook and read from it aloud, while the station's junior archivist, Velpiran, manually transferred my data. This took 12 minutes. The room was always very quiet during those 12 minutes, in the way a room is quiet when everyone is being careful not to look at something funny. Dr. Velsori gave a mid-program briefing in the 3rd month, in which she described the neural sync array's accumulated record as the most complete benthic colony dataset assembled in the cooperative's history. She said this with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has spent years earning the right to say it. It was true. The array held 4 years of continuous observation, cross-referenced against environmental variables at a resolution no previous study had matched. She projected the data architecture on the briefing room's central screen, a crystalline lattice of interconnected records, and there was a section of it, a small node, visually, that represented my contributions, the manually transferred notebook data, and she noted it the way you'd note a procedural footnote. The exchange participants' records, of course, entered via manual transcription. Of course, I wrote that down afterward, not out of bitterness, it just seemed worth noting. In the 4th month, a cascade synchronization fault hit the array. It happened during a routine expansion sync. The array was scheduled to absorb a neighboring station's records to extend the regional dataset. Something in the handshake protocol between the 2 stations' crystal architectures produced a resonance loop. The loop propagated back through the main array. The safeguards caught it before it destroyed anything, but the rollback they triggered wiped the most recent 3 months of data as a containment measure. Not corrupted. Gone. Clean excision. The safety system had decided those records were the contamination source, which they weren't, but the architecture couldn't tell the difference in the time it had. 3 months of observations, during the colony's primary spawning season, the most data-dense window of the entire program. I was in the lab when Velpirin came to find me. She was moving fast, which for a Velmorathi, they drift, they don't rush, was notable. Her filament clusters were contracted close to her body, which is what they do under stress. Voss, she said. She used my family name without the standard address prefix, which she'd never done before. The archive, the synchronization event, the last 93 days of primary array records are not recoverable. I heard, I said, Dr. Velsori's briefing. The spawning window data is gone. Yes. She hovered there for a moment. The filaments tightened further. I'd been at the station long enough to know that expression, if expression was the right word for a being that doesn't have a face. And it was the one they made when they were about to ask for something that cost them something to ask. Your notebooks, she said. I looked at the shelf above my workstation. 12 journals. I'd filled 6 of them. The 7-month program ran long because the spawning season extended, and I'd started a 7th the previous week. 6 volumes, I said. The last 3 months are in 4 through 6. There are some gaps. I had a respiratory event in week 9 that put me off station for 4 days, and there's a 48-hour window in month 11 where the bioluminescence dropped below my observation threshold. I marked the gaps. You marked. In red, flagged with timestamps, so you know exactly what's missing. Velpirin was very still. The neural sync array does not mark gaps, she said. It simply does not record them. There is no indication that a gap exists. I didn't say anything to that. I pulled volume 4 off the shelf and handed it to her. Then 5 and 6. She held all 3 with her filament clusters, the way you hold something unexpectedly heavy. The sketches, she said, paging through. You drew the colony formations. Backup in case my notation was unclear. They are very precise. I had a good supervisor, I said. She brought volumes 4 through 6 to Dr. Velsori. I wasn't in the room for that. I didn't need to be. Velkarath told me about it later. He'd been there, running the recovery protocols, and he said Dr. Velsori had stood at the table with the 3 notebooks open in front of her for a long time without saying anything. What did she say eventually? I asked. She asked whether your institution still required the practice, the notebooks. What did you tell her? I told her I didn't know. I said I would ask. He paused. Do they require it? No, I said. It's optional. He processed that. He was quiet for a moment, in the way the Velmorathi are quiet when they are revising something internally. Optional, he said. My field supervisor did it, I said, so I do it. He photographed my current notebook, volume 7, about a third full, and I got the sense this time he wasn't sending the image to his family cluster. The station ran a supplementary data recovery review that covered my handwritten records for the following 6 weeks. Every researcher at the station cycled through Velpiron's transcription queue to enter them manually into the rebuilt array. It took a while. Nobody made jokes about the 12 minutes during the weekly data review after that. Dr. Velsori sent a formal note of acknowledgement to my university supervisor. I read it because my supervisor forwarded it to me. It used phrases like methodological resilience and unanticipated redundancy architecture and practices meriting reassessment. I've kept all 7 notebooks. They're on a shelf in my office now. I did not send a reply.